Hello, and welcome to the Critical Path Institute podcast. Our goal for this podcast is to connect the dots among our core competencies in regulatory science, biomarkers, data management and standards, clinical outcome assessments, and modeling and analytics, and how we accelerate drug development. CPath created this podcast for researchers, clinicians, and industry and regulatory professionals with the hope that these conversations and the resources we share will advance your efforts and partnerships to improve global health.
Hello, welcome everyone to a new episode of the CPath podcast, where we connect the dots between medicine, science, drug development, and what really matters to people in need. Today I have with me one of our pediatric and public health experts, Kanwaljit Singh. You are the Executive Director of the International Neonatal Consortium, and that is a mouthful. Do you want to introduce yourself and explain what that title means?
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks, Klaus. It's such a pleasure to be here and talking about the work that I do in pediatrics and International Neonatal Consortium. So just to introduce myself, my role, as evident, I work in our pediatric initiative specifically focused on neonates. And the fact that I'm calling myself as an executive director, basically what it really means is I take care of everything that needs to be taken care of to make the consortium running, to make sure that we are meeting all of our deliverables of the consortium on time, and making sure that we're able to do the work this consortium is meant to exist. That is, accelerate the drug development for this very unique and very specialized population that is also known as therapeutic orphans. That is premature babies.
Yeah, great. So that's a really insightful introduction, because pediatric drug development is very special. It has challenges, but also a great deal of opportunity to truly impact lives. But then drug development for neonates, that's even more unique and more special. Can you walk us through some of that uniqueness of drug development for neonates?
So, as I said, absolutely. One thing I would, make clear right at the outset is that premature babies, neonates, are not just tiny human beings, or not just tiny version of adults, not even tiny version of older children, actually. The fact that they're born prematurely makes a huge amount of challenges. It creates a huge amount of challenges in the sense that because, their physiology, when they're born prematurely, is evolving and developing on pretty much an hourly basis, in many cases on a daily basis. And the fact that, and because they're born prematurely, they also have multiple injuries happening to their lungs, to their GI system, right? So the combined effect of very rapid physiology maturation, along with the fact that there's an injury to their organ systems, which is also healing at the same time, causes an extraordinary amount of complexity, where sometimes people don't even know what is normal from abnormal, and because people do not know what is normal from abnormal, it becomes really very, very difficult to find treatments to target them. And what that also does is, because everything that happens in a neonatal intensive care unit setting is an acute emergency all the time, 24 hours a day. And those conditions, while they're very acute, it's not as if your regular intensive care unit setting when the adult is sick and they get better and go home. These conditions, they have their lifelong chronic sequelae. By sequelae, what I really mean is, chronic lifelong effects on their development, on their nervous system, on their pulmonary system. They will have chronic issues chronic lifelong asthma. Sometimes they will have chronic issues pertaining to their neurodevelopment. In many cases, they will have increased chances of getting autism spectrum disorder. The problems are basically endless, and because acute interacts with chronic all the time, it becomes very, very difficult to for people in drug development space to do something really impactful. And bottom line is, our International Neonatal Consortium exists to actually help navigate some of these issues.
And that's a fantastic connecting the dots moment to everything else that we do at CPath, in terms of ensuring that through collaboration, we get all the actors in an ecosystem to come together. Can you describe the type of participation that you have from different sectors that matter to inform and accelerate neonatal drug development?
Yes, absolutely. So, just like pretty much every other effort at CPATH, what we really exist to do is to make sure that all of those people from industry who in their day-to-day job would be each other's competitors, we basically convince them and make them collaborate with each other and work together to come up with shared solutions and tools that basically pretty much, in fact, lift the entire boat, so to speak. Rising tide lifts all boat type of a situation, right? So that's what we believe in, and that's what we live in on a daily basis. So we have multiple pharmaceutical companies, from small startup pharmaceutical companies, biotechs, to large pharmaceutical companies which are members of our consortium. Then, because of the fact that a lot of neonatal drug development, neonatal science lives inside NICU, we have a huge amount of academic researchers who are basically neonatologists who participate in all of our efforts on a daily basis. Then we have nursing members, because even before neonatologists and physicians get to the babies, the first point of contact that we have in a neonatal intensive care unit between the baby and the physician is actually the nurses. So, we have nurses as members, and obviously parents. Parent groups are members too. But it's an international consortium. Our activities are not really limited only to the US. So in addition to very regular, intimate discussions with our regulatory colleagues from FDA, we also have similar type of collaboration going on with all global regulatory agencies, like from European Medicines Agency, UK's Medicines Agency, Japanese Medicines Agency, and so on and so forth. So we work with all stakeholders who have an interest and stake in neonatal drug development across the globe.
Fantastic. Now, in terms of the impact that the consortium has had in accelerating drug development for neonates, one of the key things that was identified very early on was that, again, because neonates are not tiny children and tiny children are not tiny adults, one of the classic approaches to categorize adverse events didn't really help in the neonatal context. And so that's something that the consortium tackled. And now we have a significant amount of impact achieved through the work of the consortium. Can you elaborate on what that work was and the impact that it has had?
Yes, absolutely. So, you would not believe until perhaps like 7-8 years ago, one of the most important aspects of, not just in neonates, but, pretty much everywhere, one of the most important aspects of drug development is safety. In addition to making sure that your drug is actually effective, you need to make sure that it's actually safe too, right? Because of very rapidly changing physiology, because of the very, there's a huge amount of spectrum also in those diseases, from mild to extraordinarily severe. And the fact that pretty much every single disease that you will see in NICU, you will not have an equivalent in older children or adults. So bottom line is, what used to happen before was that people will simply just take the adverse event measuring scales that are used in older children or adults. They will simply just adapt it to focus on neonates. Some of those had rating scales like, how does this condition impact their daily living? There is no such thing as daily living when it comes to premature babies. So this was a huge amount of issue. It was a big challenge. And INC basically tackled this by creating a standardized severity rating for more than 35 most commonly seen conditions in the neonatal intensive care unit, based on their severity, based on their occurrence, how frequently those conditions occur, and based on the fact that we should be able to standardize them. Another issue that was actually also important, which is I believe very unique in the case of neonatology, is the fact that in older populations, the line between seriousness and severity is actually pretty well defined, given the fact that in neonates, some of the outcomes, like bronchopulmonary dysplasia or lung disease, can also potentially be considered as an adverse event of a given therapeutic condition, of a given drug development program. The differentiation between outcome and adverse event is basically very murky. a lot of times you cannot really see what is what. So we had to make a huge amount of effort to actually come up with a very standardized list of most important adverse events in the NICU and standardize them by having discussions with our vast group of academic experts, industry experts, getting input from regulators, and making sure that what we are actually putting in is what actually happens in the real world. And we created this scale called as Neonatal Adverse Event Severity Scale, which is, I would tell you that it's very, very commonly used in neonatal drug development settings. I know this for a fact that whenever FDA or EMA will come across an application by a sponsor, the very first thing that they will check is what adverse event scale they're using, and their recommendation always is, if you do not have a good adverse events scale to look at, which they usually do not, they will basically ask people to use NAESS. It was so successful that we've been getting emails on a pretty much a weekly basis that their favorite adverse event that they really were looking forward to having in NAESS is actually not even there, because when we started working on that, there could be hundreds of different things that happen in NICU. We wanted to focus on the most important ones, but sometimes we missed a few important ones. So what we are doing right now is we are launching into this second iteration that is called as NAESS 2.0, which has two aims. One is expand the list of definitions from 35 to more than 35, perhaps double them. And also, just the way CPATH does it all across its other programs, we are going to actually create a digital tool, a standalone software that integrates those definitions, that also takes in, inbuilt logic for adverse event grading for those definitions, and allow people to actually enter data into that, and allow also people to print out reports, PDFs or printouts, so that they can integrate directly into their clinical trial files, so to speak. So that's the work that we are doing in severity scale rating for NICU.
And thank you, Kanwaljit. And that highlights another important connecting the dots moment with CPATH, and that is the regulatory participation and the regulatory input that then builds a level of scientific and clinical confidence, so that regulatory agencies then start recommending the use of a very actionable tool like the severity scale you just described for adverse events in the neonatal intensive care unit, and its application in drug development, which is a pretty impactful application in a space where a lot of tools are still missing. Speaking about tools that are missing and the connectivity to data, the other thing that the Neonatal Consortium has achieved, it's a very unique level of integration of clinical trial data at the patient level with real-world data sources globally. So much so, I want you to comment on that, that the other therapeutic areas in other pediatric populations, in rare and orphan diseases, as well as adult conditions, are now coming to the neonatal field to learn how to make that happen. So please comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously I don't have to tell you about the way CPATH does all of its work. So we create quantitative drug development solutions. For that, we need data, right? What happens in most cases across other therapeutic areas, other disease areas, you will always find good regulatory grade quality clinical trial data that you can actually directly get from sponsors, from academic investigators, integrate it, create databases, use those databases to create your tools, whether it's a biomarker, whether it's a clinical trial enrichment tool or an endpoint or whatever it might be, right? Very easy to do. I mean, I'm not saying it's like easy to do as in walk in the park, but relatively speaking, as compared to what happens in the neonatal space, it really is. Because, you would be surprised to know that even now, in neonatal intensive care unit or in NICUs, more than 90% of the drugs or medications that are given to the babies, they're actually used off-label. There are no records of their safety or efficacy. They're simply used because there's nothing available. It is difficult to conduct clinical trials. Because it is difficult to conduct clinical trials, there aren't any labeled drugs available. Because there aren't any labeled drugs available, you don't have any clinical trial data that you can actually leverage, right? So it leads to this sort of a vicious cycle in which there's no end to that. It just keeps on perpetuating itself over and over and over again, because there's this vicious cycle. We do not have access to those regulatory grade clinical trial data to create those tools and solutions. What we do have actually, instead of those clinical trials, which we do have some amount of it, but in spades and spades, you have electronic health record data, because every single baby that is going to be admitted in NICU will have their entirety of their information from the moment they are born to the moment that they actually discharged, right? Every single encounter, every single medication they are given, every single vital sign, every single outcome from, day one to the last day they're in the hospital will always be recorded. So those type of data come in like varying degrees of quality. Some are very high quality, some are not quite so much. But the bottom line is there's tons and tons of data available, and we did basically exactly that. We wanted to create those tools and solutions. We did not have clinical trial data available, so we leveraged the data that actually is available. So we got in touch with, by active collaboration from our colleagues in FDA, we launched this very ambitious initiative called as Real World Data Initiative, in which we worked with multiple hospitals, children's hospitals inside the US and some of them outside of the US, in UK, Japan, and other places. We integrated close to 300,000 patients worth of individual patient level data records, longitudinal, from like premature babies from 22 weeks until like maybe 42 weeks. And we created this, what I would say, one of the world's largest such databases that is actually freely available to people who want to access that. So we are using that to create those solutions and tools for multiple neonatal conditions. One of them is creating disease progression models for one of the most commonly occurring complications in NICU, that is bronchopulmonary dysplasia, which is a chronic pulmonary condition that happens in babies when they're born prematurely. Then we're also using that to, which the second project is actually pretty close to being mature. And that also I would have to give you a bit of a background, because you would be surprised to know that unlike older children, unlike adults, for most of the commonly used lab values, you will have standardized reference ranges. You know very well what is the low normal, what is the high normal, what is the average. There is no such thing in neonates again. So because you don't know what is normal, you would not know what is abnormal. Because you don't know what is abnormal, people cannot use those values confidently in their drug development program. So we wanted to solve that issue also as a corollary to our real world data initiative. So we took a lot of lab values that are routinely being collected in those EHRs. We aggregated them and we created a very user-friendly tool. We are actually already working on creating that tool that gives people access to what we consider as very generalizable reference ranges for the most commonly used labs in neonatal intensive care units. So those are our current two initiatives. Obviously, sky's the limit. Our data collection efforts don't end with BPD. They just start with BPD. So there's so many other things we can do. We can do work on other neonatal diseases as well.
Yeah, and so with the numbers are around 300,000 individual records globally.
Yeah, it's 380,000 actually.
380,000 globally. Can you comment on the countries that actually contributed data?
Yeah, so there are data from US, obviously, from Canada, United Kingdom, Japan.
Awesome. And we look to grow that database
we are.
as well.
We are constantly growing them. We're actually also, the data people from the sites we already have the data. We are constantly in touch with them, because sometimes we find that there's something or the other that is missing that we really need in their current data contribution, and updating that data periodically. Plus working with new sites as well.
Yes. So that is also a great connecting the dots moment of what we do in transforming data into actionable solutions that solve unmet needs that can accelerate drug development. So we talked about a scale, a very unique and impactful scale for adverse events, quantitative models of disease progression for bronchopulmonary dysplasia, the use of the data to define normal ranges for laboratory values in the neonatal intensive care unit. And what is next? Are there other indications that you're looking to work on?
Yes, we are. In fact, one of our newest initiatives is actually focused on neonatal brain injury. which encompasses multiple different type of brain injuries that happen when a baby is born prematurely, like white matter injury. And it also encompasses when, a baby is born potentially not preterm, at term, but also acquire, during the time of birth, has basically lack of oxygen, and then their brain gets damaged. So it's hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. So those are the two conditions in which our newest neonatal brain injury initiative is actually focused on. And for that, the background actually is the fact that whenever, somebody wants to do clinical trials in conditions like white matter injury, neonatal brain injury, hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy, they will they'll treat the baby. As soon as they suspect a brain injury, they'll keep treating the baby. Okay, so they have given the treatment. But then what happens is, in most cases, vast majority of cases, they have to actually follow the baby until the baby is like perhaps 18 months or 2 years of age, because that is when most of the most important clinical outcomes that matter, that is when those outcomes manifest, like, neurodevelopmental outcomes or motor outcomes. So you will be able to concretely see those outcomes only at that such a long follow-up period, like up to 2 years in a lot of cases. What that does is it becomes very difficult for a sponsor to conduct clinical trials with that long of a follow-up, in which your primary outcome is 2 years down the line. And there are no biomarkers available that can actually, become as a sort of a surrogate in the midpoint, so that people can actually measure those biomarkers as a marker of clinical efficacy. But there's a lot of research happening in academic settings that gives us certain ideas in terms of potentially using like markers like EEG or MRI injury score models. But they have never been validated to the level that is required by regulators like FDA or EMA to be directly integrated into drug development programs. So what we are doing in this specific instance is collecting a lot of data from electronic health records and as well as clinical trials, and using that data to potentially validate those biomarkers like MRI as prognostic markers of disease progression, and also potentially as markers for treatment efficacy down the line. So this is an initiative that just has started only a few months ago. There's a bit of a runway before we have impact on this. But the bottom line is, this is one of the most impactful areas in which we can actually make a huge amount of difference insofar as the outcomes for those babies is concerned.
Yes, and one thing that I'm very proud of regarding what the Neonatal Consortium has been able to do is put not just pediatrics, but neonatal drug development in the limelight for other areas to learn from. I mean, the fact that we have people from the Alzheimer's field and the metabolic field in adults and other pediatric populations coming our way to gain the learnings of how we've been able to integrate so many electronic health records into an integrated database that can actually be turned into tangible and actionable solutions is a fantastic achievement for the neonatal space. But let's also talk about something you mentioned earlier regarding the fact that conditions that happened in the neonatal stage of life have chronic consequences. So not only are we trying to impact very meaningfully a long, successful, fruitful life for those babies, but also the consortium has the expertise to run trials in such populations.
Yeah.
And that is a key need for some of the newer technologies, like gene-based therapies, cell-based therapies, gene editing technologies. Some of them will need to be studied in very early stages of life, including neonates, to then measure the effect years later. Can you comment on what the consortium is doing to also contribute to that?
Yeah, actually we have very recently started this new gene therapy, cell and gene therapy initiative, which actually focuses on exactly the issues that you talked about, right? 10 years ago, maybe like 20 years ago, the whole idea of gene therapy was basically pretty much science fiction. I used to only read about it in those novels by Robin Cook, perhaps, I think. with the field is rapidly maturing, more rapidly maturing than one might want to admit. But what that also does is, I have seen this as this field becomes more and more mainstream, as it becomes more mature. One of the important corollaries to that is going to be people would want to intervene for those conditions, because the most amount of benefit happens for gene and cell-based therapies is if you are intervening pre-symptomatically, when the baby does not have yet, when the patient doesn't have yet symptoms, as allowed by safety and efficacy considerations. The trend is going to be intervene as early as is possible, going down the age range as early as neonates. I wouldn't go so far as to say premature babies, but term neonates. This is a reality. This is actually happening in many cases. More and more, it'll actually keep on happening more and more. So to basically to be proactive rather than to be reactive to the development of this science of cell and gene therapies, we have this cell and gene therapy initiative, in which we are actually going to target exactly those sort of issues. How to conduct gene therapy clinical trials in the neonatal age range. What are the safety and efficacy considerations that you need to consider? What happens if you are intervening now? Baby doesn't have any disease symptoms now. You give a gene therapy, right? But then you have to follow those babies years and years down the line. Actually, for interventions as sensitive as gene editing, in many cases, FDA and EMA would ask the sponsors to follow the baby for at least like 15 or 20 years or even more in some cases. This is an extraordinarily complicated situation for anybody to be involved in that, right? So our initiative focuses on how do you follow up those babies after for so long a period of a time, when you are intervening pre-symptomatically, and then you never really know when symptoms are going to develop. What are the safety issues? Because you're just intervening once. It's not as if you can take the treatment back. The intervention is irreversible. In some cases, there are serious adverse event related issues, like all of those gene therapy related news that we've been seeing, fatal hepatic toxicity that happens. Those type of toxicity, it doesn't happen that often, but when they do happen, they're catastrophic. One of the things that we're also considering is if we can create and maintain a central registry of sorts that everybody who is doing gene therapy intervention can actually contribute their data to, so that we can actually very effectively and efficiently isolate the signal from the noise, so to speak. So that is one of our main considerations for getting into this gene therapy initiative, because but not just that, but also the fact that in addition to these just gene therapy related issues, newborn screening is also another one of those big upcoming areas. I think 13 out of 50 states already allow for genetic screening at birth, and they allow reimbursement for that, and there are probably going to be more states than that in the future. So we have an interest in newborn screening and how to make issues pertaining to newborn screening a little bit more efficient. So those are some of the issues that we are tackling in our gene therapy initiative.
Fantastic, Kanwaljit. So stay tuned for more updates in future episodes as to what is happening and the impact we're having through the Neonatal Consortium. We're also going to have future episodes with a broader team of our pediatric experts to talk about other pediatric populations and opportunities. But this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you, Kanwaljit, and thanks, everyone. We'll see you in a future episode.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Klaus. Good to be here.
Did you enjoy this episode? Share it with a friend or colleague, or leave a review on iTunes, and help others discover and support our mission. We are welcoming guests with a range of experiences and viewpoints. The views expressed belong to the guests themselves. Learn more about Critical Path Institute at cpath.org. That's c-path.org. Stay tuned for our next episode coming soon, and thanks for listening.